Hi, I'm Morgan, and this is ADHD and Autism Great Minds Don't Think Alike, presented by Autism Virtually. The other people that are doing this are Lindsay, Jen, Chris, Elle, and Leaf. So, I have combined inattentive and hyperactive ADHD. So, some of the symptoms are that we get easily distracted, struggles to learn new information, resist tasks that require mental energy, or regularly loses belongings. Where hyperactive and impulsive ADHD, you have squirming and fidgeting, described as on the go, and has difficulty taking turns. Here are the criteria that you need to get diagnosed with ADHD. For the inattention, you need lack of attention to details and careless mistakes, difficulty sustaining attention, does not seem to listen, does not follow through on instructions, difficulty organizing tasks and activities, avoids sustained mental effort, loses and misplaces objects, easily distracted, and forgetful in daily activities. For hyperactivity, you need to fidget, leave your seat frequently, running around and feeling restless, excessively loud or noisy, always on the go, talks excessively, blurts out answers, difficulty waiting his or her turn, or tends to act without thinking. So, people with ADHD tend to have inconsistent performance, have difficulty changing routines, and have difficulty with transitions, which is also kind of related to autism as well there. So that's another sign that your kid could have both. They can also have poor interception and tend to bump into things and have not good fine motor skills. So if you seem like you feel clumsy, it could just be because you have ADHD. You also have difficulties with emotional regulation. So you can have extreme outbursts and not knowing how to control or deal with your emotions that you're feeling. So autism and ADHD both present differently for both boys and girls. So boys tend to have forgetfulness, carelessness, risky behavior, trouble getting along, disorganization, excessive talking, daydreaming, and difficulty sitting still. So ADHD has a lot of strengths and weaknesses, but here we're just going to focus on the strengths and also how it shows for person per person. So what ADHD looks like for a lot of people is that, oh, a person just has trouble focusing or they tend to fidget, where in reality, people have a lot of sensory processing disorders and financial problems, mood swings, and poor impulse control, and a whole bunch of other issues such as sleeping problems, but people don't really see that because a lot of people tend to just show outward signs, whereas more so those are more inward signs that people don't express as much. Some of the strengths of ADHD is that people tend to talk fast and are very creative. They are very good at learning. They hyper-focus, have a good sense of humor. They're good at forgiving people, and they're great at brainstorming. So ADHD does present differently between boys and girls. So as a female, I will show symptoms differently than someone of the opposite gender of me. So women tend to talk a lot, have difficulty focusing, overspend, have clutter around, have issues listening, and tend to be more forgetful. Whereas boys seem to be more reckless and impulsive. So masking is when a person with ADHD tries to hide that they have ADHD and blend more in with everyone else. Girls tend to mask more than boys. Um, Girls tend to try and be more observant and learn from the people around them and try and mimic everyone else. Masking leads to women not getting diagnosed because they're not showing those outward symptoms that boys show because they're not masking the people around them. And masking is often learned when you're a child because you're constantly told, don't do this, don't be loud, you need to be quiet, you need to sit still. And then a lot of people just continue to do those things later on in life and they don't realize that they actually have ADHD because they just learn to kind of deal with it and listen to what everyone else says. So ADHD has a lot of connections to depression, unfortunately. You have a lot of hyper focusing and hyperactivity and impulsivity, and a lot of people with depression are, well, they're sad, they're feeling physically slowed down, and you're feeling worthless and have excessive guilt. And a lot of the combined things that people with ADHD and depression have: the sleep issues, appetite changes, self-esteem impacted, self-efficiency impacted, negative beliefs about self and world, irritability, restlessness, muscle tension, rejection, sensitivity, higher rates of GI issues, the time per session impacted, higher rates of substance abuse, which these are red flags that you need to look for in your children so you can actually see and get them the help that they may possibly need if they are diagnosed with ADHD. Because it's not something that a lot of people think about, how it could also be affecting you mentally more so than just physically. So, with ADHD and autism, unfortunately, there is a high risk of suicide between both of them. Um, ADHD had more than double the rate of suicide ideation, 3 times the rate of suicide plans, and more than double the rate of suicide attempts than someone that is neurotypical. Impulsivity leads to a lot of, hurtful decisions and harmful decisions, which a lot of times, when you're depressed, turns into suicide. And the rate of suicide is 3 times higher for someone with autism, which is extremely awful. And you shouldn't have to think about all these terrible things that come on top of being neurodivergent. But you do need to look for those signs in your children and yourself to know when to get help. Okay.
Is this me now?
Yeah, sorry, Lindsay, your turn.
That's okay. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the human paradox of ADHD and autism. Are we good? I thought somebody was trying to say something. Okay. All right. So a lot of times people with autism are also diagnosed with ADHD. And it's kind of hard at first to identify because there are some things that are totally different, like striving for the routine with autism, can't stick to the routine with ADHD, being easily understimulated with autism, with ADHD, sorry, being easily overstimulated, thriving under pressure or getting it burned out easily, craving social interaction, and being in a situation where socializing is very difficult for kids with autism or adults with autism and ADHD. Also, getting easily distracted by new things, losing interest really quickly. You can imagine just going through every day, fighting between those two things. Next slide, Jen. Okay, so up until 2013, you were either diagnosed with ADHD or autism. It wasn't a dual diagnosis until 2013. An interesting fact is that 80% of people with autism also meet the criteria for ADHD. A lot of times the diagnosis with autism goes on and they won't find the ADHD diagnosis until later. You'll see most people with ADHD, a lot of people will have the ADHD diagnosis and not autism, but you will see people with the autism diagnosis always have features of ADHD, not always diagnosed, but they can be there. Yes, the study from the Netherlands shared, I don't know if we have a link to that. We'll have to look at that then. But it was very interesting. Autism and ADHD is a different manifestation of a single condition with a range of subtypes. If you get a chance, or if we can put up that link, it's a very interesting study to read. They have autism and ADHD have a lot of different criteria for the conditions. And some of the similarities you'll see is the social communication impairments, heightened sensory responses, defiant behavior, and problems with regulating emotions. Okay, this is very similar to what Morgan had. You'll just see the differences between ADHD and autism and some of the things that are the same. Coincides with the DSM-5 for the dual diagnosis. They'll have sensory issues, emotional regulation difficulties, special interests and passions, things that they fixate on. Some things that are strictly ADHD, that they crave novelty and new experiences, hyperactivity and impulsivity, inhibition difficulties, and with autism, they have strict routines. They crave those routines. They self-soothe through repetitive behaviors and routines. A lot of people may stim. Also having difficulty reading social cues and picking up on things from their peers. I keep going to click it to change to the next slide, but okay. Jen found this, and it's a very good quote. "My thoughts are like butterflies. They are beautiful, but they fly away." You'll see that a lot with ADHD. They have so much going on, so many thoughts, and they'll be here one minute and the next minute they're gone. Doesn't mean that they're not relevant to something that you're talking about. And just this bubble chart here, it's never just a thought by itself. You have one thing and then you're thinking about something else, and then something else stems from that. It's kind of like having a whole bunch of computer tabs opened up. There's just so much going on. It's hard to focus on that one thought. I'm not going to read all of those. You guys could take a look at that. Excuse me. A lot of people you'll see in the schools define those with ADHD or autism as lazy, defiant, holding strong beliefs, where it's not the case. It's more overwhelmed. they may see things as being completed already or done in their eyes. So they're not being defiant. They are holding their own, and they have a very good reason as to why they're not doing things or why they may be waiting to do something. It's not laziness. You could elaborate on that, Jen. Sorry. Okay, this goes along with the human paradox slide that we had at the beginning. So on the left, you'll see everything that applies to ADHD and the opposite for autism on the right. ADHD being very spontaneous and making spontaneous plans. Then you have autism. You want to have that routine and you want to have those plans in place. If not, you can get very upset. So having both of those, at one time you want to be spontaneous, but you want to follow a routine. It's a battle within yourself every day. Same with struggling to organize and having a strong need for the order. Again, with autism, routine is very important, but at the same time, if you have ADHD, you're struggling to keep that order because you have so much going on inside your head. Okay, so this one is impulsively making purchases for a new hyperfixation. And the autism part, hyper focus on researching the products. When you have that ADHD component, you tend to be very impulsive and looking at new things like, oh, I like that, I want to buy it. The autism, I want to know all about it before I buy that. Struggling to be on time because you have so many things going on during your day. And upset when others are a few minutes late. I think that depends on the person and how much of a routine you want to follow. Excuse me. Hyperfixating on a wide variety of topics and also having long-term special interest. You'll see, I know my son who has autism and ADHD, he will go from topic to topic occasionally, but he will know a whole lot about that topic before he switches to a next one. He has a lot of interest, but he does like to know enough about those special interests to share it with you. Forgetting steps and plans and needing plans to execute perfectly. I think that depends on age groups. I know we were talking about this one when we were getting this presentation ready. Forgetting steps and plans, I think, can be very common with people with ADHD. I think it needs to be simplified and just take things one step at a time because there's already a lot going inside your brain. So you want to take it step by step. And the autism, needing plans to execute perfectly. I think that just goes along with the routine and wanting to know what's next. Sorry, I didn't even realize that changed. Enticed by novel foods and hypercritical of food tastes and textures. A lot of people with autism probably are very particular about the types of foods they eat. Some things like mashed potatoes, jello, pudding, that's always a very sensitive food for a lot of people with autism. I know some who really love that texture, some who really don't. Wanting new experiences and wanting to stick to what I know I like. Again, it's you fighting with, do I want to stick to a routine? Do I want to try something new? It all depends on the person. Okay, both, again, if we go back to the DSM-5, struggling with emotional dysregulation, being a logical and analytical thinker, and struggling to retain information, wanting to learn everything. It's a lot. having to deal with all of this on a daily basis. I can't imagine what they go through just thinking about what part of my brain do I want to satisfy at that moment. Okay, sorry, I am not, there's so much going on around me. I'm being overly stimulated. Like on the bottom here, being easily overstimulated or easily understimulated. Go ahead. That goes with both diagnoses. Missing details and making mistakes on boring tasks, not necessarily just boring to them. It's not something that they're interested in. So they don't want to, sorry. Where am I at? Missing details and making mistakes. So it's not something that they're focused on. Notice the small details and points out other mistakes. That's a lot autism. They will notice things that we don't pick up on. Go get whatever you need, honey. Okay. And all of these are for both ADHD and autism. Having difficulty sitting still. Finally, I can't, can you wait a second? Hypersensitive to other people, fidgeting, interrupting others when they are busy, and hate being bothered while in hyperfocus. It's just when you're focused on something, it's very hard to take your attention off of that and find something else to start on. Okay, so as Morgan talked about a lot with the ADHD and depression, anxiety goes hand in hand with ADHD and autism a lot of the time. We have the 50% of adults. What's this? I also have anxiety. 75% of adults with autism also have the anxiety diagnosis. And you'll see the 30% in children and 40% in children with autism. You can imagine going through every day, fighting your mind just to get through the day would cause anxiety in anybody. These are high numbers.
Thank you. You did a great job, Lindsay, especially with all of your little awesome people around you. All right, so we're going to talk about some interventions next with me. And I'm going to go back to both Morgan and Lindsay when we start talking about medication, because that's more in their wheelhouse. So what are some different interventions you can use to help your children, teen, even adults, perhaps yourself, with ADHD? So we could talk behavioral intervention strategies. That's something Lindsay and I do. Creating a routine. Now we're talking, of course, dual diagnosis here. We try to follow the same schedule every day from wake up time to bedtime. That can be very calming for the autistic mind. Try to be organized. Put school bags, clothing, and toys in the same place every day. I remember when Leaf was younger, and getting ready for school was like a horror show. It was like a war every day. Like my day was wrecked by the time he got in the bus. But we learned that by organizing ourselves, by doing as much as we could the night before and having like what we needed, like as close to him as possible, we were able to get rid of a lot of that issues. But when you find organization rules, try to find things that work for them. The way they organize may look like a bit of chaotic to us, but it's meaningful to them. So you want to be teaching them how to have organization strategies that work for them. You want to avoid distractions like TV, radio, computer, especially when you're doing homework. I know Morgan and Lisa had said that they need like absolute dead quiet in order to be focused on being able to do their work. So this is incredibly important for the ADHD part of their brain. Limiting choices. is a great way to keep your kids from being overwhelmed. You want to offer a choice between two things instead of saying, hey, what would you like for dinner, buddy? You know, at the end of a long day, that can really like blow your mind, especially if like you think of like 20 things you like, or you think of this one thing and you have the thought bubbles from the ASD thinking. So try to like offer them two things you have and that you can make. Simplify. You want to use clear, brief directions to remind your child of responsibilities. Communication is one of the major hallmarks in autism. So you want to make sure that you don't want to say, hey, Johnny, go stand over there. You want to say, hey, Johnny, could you stand to the left of the lamp? You know, just be sure that when you're giving directions, they're simple, they're brief, they're concise. We don't do that a lot, so it's good to keep our mind. You want to discipline effectively. It says here, instead of yelling or spanking, use timeouts or removal of privileges as consequences for inappropriate behavior. Well, it's a bit difficult. This is probably one of the hardest things parents of kids with ADHD, parents of kids with autism struggle with, like when to discipline and how to discipline effectively. It's incredibly important that you understand what you're looking at. So that comes with a lot of knowledge. You know, Johnny's not eating his dinner. You know, is it because he's being difficult, or could it be like a sensory issue? Why is this happening? Do never yell. We're going to talk about co-regulation further on. You always want to keep calm for both mindsets. And if you're going to use a timeout, what I would encourage you to do that I did at home that worked, and trust me, he did some things that should have been like a month grounding other kids. We only blizzarded one day, and every new day was a new start. If they're not immediate and meaningful, these consequences are not going to work for kids who have ADHD or autism. Discover talent. Find out what your child does well, whether it's sports, art, or music. It can boost social skills and self-esteem. This is a part of the neurodivergent love languages that we've talked about in the past. You want to join in what they're really excited about. That's the way you show them you love them. And it's a great way for our kids who have social difficulties, whether they're ADHD or autistic, to connect with other people over things they love. It gives them the ability to info dump, which I'm going to have Chris talk to you guys about later, once we get through all of this. And the last is use goals and rewards. You can find that behavior charts do work as long as they're meaningful to them. My son loved Pokemon cards, so that was always something he could earn. And you want to make sure that the goals are realistic. Rome wasn't built in a day. So if you want like this big goal to be given, make sure that like you're doing small steps towards it. Co-regulation strategies are incredibly important. It says here on the thing Lindsay gave us, when you're raising kids with ADHD, autism, and anxiety, when our approach to our exhausted and overwhelmed kid is a co-regulating hug rather than a socially acceptable timeout, what if we had each other's backs? Collectively, mothers can fight against the unhealthy desire to people please and change the narrative for outside the box kids. What this is kind of talking about is if you had like all of this stuff Lindsay was talking about, kind of like going at each other in your head, you know, you're going to get cranky, you're going to get tired. They're just kids. I mean, we get cranky, we get tired, we snap at our kids. Like, I think it's really important that as parents and as adults that we remember our children kind of need that ability to do those things too, and to not always be met with sit in the corner, Johnny, you know, instead like giving them a hug and saying, hey, it's okay. You know, I've had days when I've had too much too, and I raised my voice and I didn't mean to. It's incredibly important with autistic and ADHD kids that you remain calm. Do not lose your minds in front of them. No matter how chaotic it can get, you stay calm, because what you're doing is you're anchoring them down to you. If we start yelling and our kids are up here and we go up here, they're just going to match us and we are never going to come down. It's like it never ends well. Co-regulation is key. Here are some tips for classroom teachers. Use of visuals is incredibly important. Most autistic and ADHD thinkers are visual thinkers. whole class interventions like movement breaks. You don't want to single out one kid. You don't want to say, hey, Johnny, I want you to run to the office and hand this letter, which we used to make my son do. Like we had him run books upstairs pointlessly just to give him a break. It's important to include everybody. Hands-on learning, have the kids do. And also check for understanding, because ADHD kids have a hard time hearing every word. So they kind of try to like melt kind of half of what they heard into something that makes sense. It's incredibly important at the end to make sure that your ADHD thinker is learned what you wanted to teach them. Also, Chris added this wonderful whole body listening is not best for all kids. ADHD kids, especially the hyperactive kids, they have to move to learn. If you have an autistic kid who is hyposensitive, that means they're the ones that are like jumping up and down and running and moving. And they actually think better that way. If you force them to stay still, they're just thinking, stay still, don't move, because they're fighting against who they are. They're not listening to what you're trying to teach them. It's important that at school and also at home that you realize that movement is a lot of the times key to the success of teaching our kids. All right, now I'm going to bring in Morgan and Lindsay if she happens to be here. So there are two types of medicines you can give for ADHD. I've met a lot of parents who don't want to medicate their kids when they have ADHD, but there's a great link here. And I will add the other link that Lindsay said to add before we share this with you guys. But if you do not medicate your kids and help their brains balance out, you're going to have an adult or a teen that starts substance abuse. It is like a real issue and a real problem. So for those parents who really are anti-medicine, I suggest you rethink and possibly read this study, because you don't want to have an adult who drinks or does some kind of drug that has the same effect as something they could get from a doctor. All right, Lindsay, do you want to talk about the kind of medicines that are available here?
Sure. I don't have a lot of experience about exactly everything, but a lot of times I think doctors will try a non-stimulant first. I don't know, the whole process of giving your child with ADHD medicine is that it's a process. You may not get something that works well for them at first. I know we tried personally 4 or 5 different medications and combinations of medications until we finally found the right one. I know some people even try, coffee as a stimulant, because they want to try something different. They don't want to medicate their child. But a lot of the stimulants, Adderall, Ritalin, I know they try not to give to younger kids at first, just because of the dependency on them as they get older. But stimulants do boost energy, attention, alertness. It is an extended release, so it won't work right away. It's a little bit, so over time, so it lasts longer. I don't know some of the, I wish I had an example of the non-stimulant types of drugs that they use. But they do help with certain aspects of the impulsivity and stuff with children with ADHD. But like I said, it is a process. So I think that's what deters people from getting their child on medication, because they may try one thing and see that it turned their kid into a zombie, and they don't want that, because now instead of bouncing off the walls, they're sitting there staring into space and still not doing anything. So it definitely does. It's a trial and error. And it's something that needs to be discussed between parents and doctors, treatment team, whatever services you have in place, you can discuss with them, because it takes a while to find the right one. I don't know if that was the same for Morgan, but I know for our son, it definitely took a few tries.
Yes, so I did have a similar story. I got diagnosed at 7 and I got put on medication because I went to a private school where I didn't get offered any help or accommodations that I needed for my ADHD. So I was forced to take meds pretty much because they didn't have the resources to be able to help me. I started out with a bunch of different meds and I had trial and error with a few, but I was on Ritalin for the longest time, which I think I tried 1 or 2 before the Ritalin. And then Ritalin did give me the feeling as Lindsay described, which was not great, but I didn't realize that that wasn't normal. So I spent a lot of time feeling terrible and just kind of dealing with it until I found ADHD support groups and I was like, oh, I shouldn't be feeling this way. I should be able to like have fun and talk and feel emotion, which I wasn't really feeling on Ritalin. So then I made the switch to Adderall, I think 2 years ago, and it was the best thing I could have done for myself. It has helped me so much, and I don't feel any of those negative emotions that I had. So I understand why some people wouldn't want to medicate their children, but for my situation, I needed to be medicated, and I have pretty severe ADHD. I'm on a pretty high dosage, and I was on the highest dosage of Ritalin, so I do need it.
Okay, maybe you can talk, and maybe Leaf, if he wants to join in too, talk about how it helps you, because I could see it from my perspective as a parent, the days where my son doesn't have it and when he does, he is able to focus and have a conversation with me, whereas if he doesn't have it, his thoughts are all over the place. He's not sitting still, which he doesn't. I don't expect him to.
Yeah.
But he is all over the place. So if you could talk about a little bit about how it helps you focus.
Yeah, well, this makes it easier to pay attention, I guess, and kind of makes me feel a bit more awake, if that's the right word for it. Since otherwise it can be difficult to pay attention for an extended period of time. Well, that it can make me feel like I have more stamina, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. I definitely, because with having ADHD, I also have trouble sleeping. So a lot of time my Adderall definitely helps keep me awake since I'm having such little sleep at night. And it also it makes me feel like more productive because I'm able to actually focus to get the tasks that I want to get done. So it makes me like I will have a lot of the days that I don't take it, I have very like low motivation. But do actually take meds, I will actually feel motivated and like I'm able to go do all these tasks and I get a lot done. Whereas like the days that I don't, I kind of just feel more mopey and like I don't really want to go around and do things.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. We will be having a question answer section for our awesome volunteers after this. So see if I can bring Chris in. Are you there, Chris? This is incredibly important to Chris.
No, I think she sent a message earlier that
How did she have to go? This is her
I
favorite
think
part.
so.
So what's really important is if you have a kid with autism and ADHD, one or the other, you really have to reframe your thinking to have a growth mindset and have a fresh perspective. So often in life, things that you regard as an impediment turn out to be great good fortune. It's all in how you look at it. Problem-focused mindset is saying, Judy's bossy, Johnny's defiant, Morgan is demanding. instead of flipping a script and thinking of it as in a positive. You can say a natural leader, visionary instead of bossy. Instead of someone being defiant, they hold strong beliefs, they're bold, they're determined. Someone who's demanding knows what they want and they're outspoken, they're not afraid to ask for it. Dramatic people are expressive and passionate. Fearful people, they're cautious and careful. Fussy, you have strong preferences, and that's okay. Hyperactive, energetic, enthusiastic on the go. Impulsive, no, they're spontaneous and instinctive. Oppositional, no, they advocate for a different perspective. Rebellious, they're finding their own way. Stubborn, persistent, determined, and steadfast, which Leaf definitely is. His determination has brought him far in life. Talkative, that means they love to communicate. Tattletale, they're looking for justice and they respect rules. Unfocused, that means they can multitask and pay attention to many things at once. Or someone who wants attention all the time is advocating for their needs and they're seeking connection. I'm going to ask Morgan to talk a little bit about this because as a neurodivergent surrounded by neurodiverse people and no accommodations, your tests probably were a bit all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, I always, because I was medicated, I did pretty well in school. I didn't really struggle. I didn't do bad on tests necessarily. It depended on the subject. I had a lot of troubles with English and reading comprehension, which is part of having ADHD, because sometimes we just can't settle the focus to read a lot. That was my hardest part, because I excelled in math and any of that stuff, but I always struggled with reading and spelling. But definitely having, taking the SATs and everything is definitely not made for someone with autism or ADHD, because you have to sit there for long periods of time, not allowed to move, not allowed to do anything. And it's just, we have to, as a neurodivergent person, we kind of just have to just learn how to function, and there's masking part of it. We kind of just have to mask our way through everything else to try and figure out how to survive, pretty much.
Yeah.
So that's my experience.
Yeah, and there are a lot of qualities that aren't measured by tests, I know, like reading, like you said initially with my kiddo, they were terrible test scores. A lot of it was, why did the author use this to express this feeling? Well, they don't know. Like Leaf didn't know. You might as well have asked him, why is blue blue? Like it made no sense. You wouldn't get those answers. So we often would get tests kind of in the middle, but it's important not to let a test score or a report card define your child. Tests don't measure creativity, critical thinking, self-discipline, endurance, persistence, curiosity, humor, civic-mindedness, leadership. We shouldn't allow test scores and report cards to define our children. Interesting bit here that 50% of gifted kids have ADHD. Now that doesn't mean that 50% of ADHD kids are gifted, but if you just look at the pool of gifted kids, half of them have ADHD. And up to 2% of autistic brains are gifted versus 1% of the general population. So I want you to think about this though. The general population is about 99%, right? So everybody that's not autistic, and autistic is only 1%, and 2% of that 1% are gifted, which is an insanely high number. So having ADHD and autism allows you to think differently, and that can be a great boon. Now, if you have both, yes, it can be difficult because there's a lot of warring going on inside your brain. But it's also awesome because you have twice the awesomeness. You're a great problem solver. You work well under pressure, great brainstormer, crisis situations, you're the go-to person. Hey, you're honest, you're kind to people, you have a great work ethic, you're original, you're creative, you're passionate. So having both of these neurotypes kind of bouncing around in your head can be really great too, because it gives you twice the strengths. We really appreciate all of you for giving us your time and listening to us. We hope that you learned a lot about ADHD and autism during our training. If you have any questions, we will have a comment section down below this video that you can ask, and we will definitely answer them.